I was 18 at the time, enjoying the beginning of summer with no school and no job. Most of my days were spent inside, playing video games, watching YouTube or TV, and just relaxing. One night, my parents were out of town for a few days, leaving me alone in the house. This was a common occurrence, so it never bothered me. Sometimes I'd invite friends over, but that night I was content to enjoy some time to myself. I was watching a rerun of one of my favorite shows on Netflix while scrolling through my phone when I heard a knock at the front door. I paused the TV and went to see who it was. It struck me as odd that someone would be visiting so late, but I caught myself before carelessly opening the door. I peered through the peephole and saw two men, both dressed similarly, waiting for me to answer. I hesitated, considering whether to ask what they wanted. In the end, I chose to stay silent and waited for them to leave. A moment later, they called out, "Hello, we're looking to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Ian," referring to my parents. I changed their name for privacy. Confused, I remained quiet, knowing it was far too late for any visit, even if it was important. After a minute, the men exchanged glances and whispered something to each other before walking off the porch. With the outdoor lights off, I couldn't see where they went, and I noticed there were no headlights or cars, which made me wonder if they had walked there. I returned to the TV, leaving it on pause for a while, listening in case they came back. It only took a few minutes before I heard footsteps outside the house. The men approached the porch, but instead of knocking again, they moved around to the side. I hurried to the back window and saw them enter the backyard through the open fence. I quickly ducked away from the window to avoid being seen, but I could hear them heading toward the back door. They started talking and fiddling with the door. Seizing the moment, I grabbed my phone and hid in the garage. I called the police to report the possible break-in. Less than a minute later, a loud pop echoed through the house as the back door swung open. I heard their footsteps move through the house and up the stairs toward the bedrooms. A door opened, they went in, and then it closed behind them. After that, silence fell. I waited in terror for 10 long minutes until the police finally arrived. As they did, I heard a few hurried footsteps upstairs, followed by the sound of the two men arguing. Some officers entered through the back door and rushed upstairs, while another officer came to help me out of the garage. The men didn't resist arrest, but they refused to explain why they were there. Despite the weeks that followed, and the clear signs they weren't just robbing the house, they could only be charged with breaking and entering. What frightens me most is that they appeared to be searching for my parents. It felt as if they planned to wait upstairs for them to return from their trip. I often think about whether I should have revealed myself and if that would have stopped the break-in. But something about their demeanor suggests they would have gone through with it anyway and done whatever they intended to do to me, whatever was necessary. I live on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Wyoming, primarily because owning a large plot of land here is more feasible than in many other states. My house is small, but cozy enough for living alone. This incident occurred 4 years ago, in 2019, during a spring marked by nearly non-stop rain. It was a Sunday evening, and I was home from work, enjoying a day of watching TV and resting. Around 6 or 7, I heard an unexpected knock at my door. The sound barely cut through the rain, and when I opened the door, I was surprised to find a stranger, not a mailman or anyone else I recognized. It was unusual for someone to come all the way out to my remote property. "How can I help you?" I asked. The man, appearing to be in his late 20s, claimed he had been camping in the nearby woods and had run into trouble. He needed a place to stay for the night. Given my location, if he was telling the truth, it made sense that he would come to me, being the closest shelter within several miles. The pouring rain made me feel even more sympathetic, but the potential danger of letting a stranger into my home weighed heavily on my mind. I offered to call for a ride into town, but he declined, insisting he couldn't stay. He then walked away, heading down the dirt road before veering into the woods. I brushed off the encounter and returned to my TV. About 2 hours later, well into the night, I noticed an orange glow through my backyard window. Curious, I pulled back the curtain and saw a small campfire flickering under a large tree in the woods. Next to it stood a shadowy figure holding something, though I couldn't tell if he was facing my house or looking deeper into the woods. After a moment, I closed the curtains and called the police to report the person outside. I knew it would take them some time to arrive, but I wanted to ensure the stranger was gone before I went to bed. Once off the phone, I checked the window again. The fire still burned, but the figure had vanished. Then I heard footsteps approaching my house. I rushed to the other window and saw the man walking by, a hunting rifle in hand, before he turned and walked to my front door. He banged on it a few times, then fell silent. Grabbing my self-defense handgun from the closet, I hid near the wall, trying to process the situation. He struck the door again, this time with the stock of his rifle, nearly breaking it. I realized I had to act quickly. I fired a shot toward the door frame, the loud bang ringing through the house. When my hearing returned, all I heard was the relentless rain. No footsteps, no more banging, no shouting. After about 5 minutes of silence, I gathered my courage and peeked through the peephole, seeing an empty porch and clear footprints leading away from my house. He must have fled right after the shot. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search and discovered intriguing evidence near the campfire. They found a duffel bag, which had likely been buried nearby and dug up just hours before the attack. They informed me that it was probably a burglary kit or even a murder kit planted with the intent to be used later. This revelation meant that whoever had attacked me had planned it and had likely been outside my house at least once before that night. Why he chose me remains a mystery, and as of now, there's still no closer identification of him than there was 4 years ago. I continue to live in the same house, haunted by the worry that he might return. Growing up, I lived with my mom in a small house during my middle and high school years. She worked an overnight job, which left me alone most nights from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. This started a few months before my high school graduation. On a typical night, I said goodbye to my mom at 7:30 and played video games for a few hours. Since it was a school night, I knew I shouldn't stay up too late, but I ended up playing longer than I should have. Around 11:30, I turned everything off and went to bed, but I spent another hour on my phone before finally falling asleep. When I woke up, I thought I heard a door closing downstairs. I glanced at the clock and saw it was 3:30, so I assumed my mom had come home early from work. I rolled over, trying to go back to sleep while listening to footsteps moving around downstairs. After a minute, I began to pay closer attention. My mom usually went straight upstairs when she got home, but it sounded like someone was just wandering through the house. As I listened for another few minutes, I realized the footsteps weren't stopping. They were moving from room to room, almost as if taking a tour. A sense of unease crept in. What if it wasn't my mom? I got up and turned on the light in my room, and almost immediately, the footsteps stopped. I listened intently from behind my door, but heard nothing. Carefully, I opened the door and peered into the hallway. I expected to see some light coming from downstairs, but the entire house was dark. Whoever was down there hadn't turned on any lights, which made me even more frightened. I tried to be as quiet as possible and crept down the hallway until I reached the top of the stairs. Kneeling down, I looked through the railing into the living room. No one was there, and even in the dark, I could see that nothing had been disturbed. My PlayStation was still in place, which reassured me that maybe there was no intruder. If someone had broken in, they likely would have stolen something valuable. I just wanted to find out if it was my mom moving around, or if I was experiencing some strange auditory hallucinations. I descended the steps, calling out, "Mom, are you home?" There was no answer, no signs of movement. I walked through the hallway into the kitchen and immediately noticed a shoe print on the tile floor. Looking up, I spotted a figure across the room. A man sat at the dining table wearing a dark mask and black clothing, making it hard to see any of his features. He was staring at me, silent and unmoving, with an emotionless expression. I dashed back upstairs and locked myself in my room as I called 911. The operator provided updates on the police's estimated arrival time, but after a minute, I heard the man slowly walking across the downstairs and approaching the bottom of the staircase. I whispered to the operator in a panic until I heard the front door open, followed by the sound of the man leaving the house. Not even 30 seconds later, I saw headlights through the window. My mom had pulled into the driveway. I rushed outside to meet her and explain what had happened. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search but found no incriminating evidence that could help identify the man. It seemed he wasn't there to rob us, nor did he appear interested in me. This indicated he was likely trying to harm or abduct my mom. It made sense why he had broken in just minutes before she typically got home. I can't help but think about what might have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs to check, or if my mom had arrived just a minute earlier and walked inside, unaware of the man waiting for her. I'm 30 and live alone in a rural house. My neighbors are half a mile down the road, and while I chat with them occasionally, I mostly keep to myself. I only head into town when necessary. I'm semi-retired, spending most of my time at home, though I do some contracting work for a few months each year. One late fall day, I was outside gathering my equipment to store in the shed for winter. It was just tools and lawnmowers I had left out. While I was working, I noticed something unusual. A man walking along the empty road that leads to my driveway. He had no backpack or camping gear. Given that the town was a 4-hour walk away, it struck me as odd. I watched him until he disappeared down the road. After he left, I looked up and down the road, but there were no cars in sight. It felt strange, but I brushed it off and finished my work. That evening, I returned inside before dark and started making dinner. Suddenly, a loud thud from outside startled me. It sounded like wood, as if it came from the shed. Peering through the window, I saw the shed door wide open. It was old, but it had never unlatched on its own. Feeling uneasy, I grabbed my rifle just in case, confident it wouldn't be anything dangerous. As I walked to the shed, I listened closely. The night was eerily quiet, and I noticed no signs of wildlife or people. When I reached the open shed door, I shined my flashlight inside. Everything seemed in order, and after checking thoroughly for any hiding animals, I found nothing. I closed the shed door securely and headed back. As I walked through the field toward my house, a growing sense of unease enveloped me. Once inside, I locked the door behind me. In the hallway, I spotted a shoe print on the floor. Flicking on the light, I noticed a line of dirty footprints leading to the spare bedroom. My heart raced as I gripped my rifle and cautiously approached the door. Leaning against it, I could hear someone breathing on the other side. Before I could react, the handle twisted and the door swung open. I jumped back, raising my rifle as a man appeared, seemingly ready to charge with a large metal shovel. My gun seemed to stop him in his tracks. He stood there, shovel raised like a weapon, his face filled with rage. I shouted for him to stay back, trying to sound more intimidating than I felt. The man held his ground, his anger unwavering. I felt trapped. Calling the police would take at least an hour, and I didn't want to hold him at gunpoint for that long. In the tense silence, he suddenly threw the shovel at me and dashed back into the room. I rushed in to see what he was up to and watched him crawl out of the window. Part of me wanted to stop him, but another part couldn't move. He jumped out and ran off into the field, disappearing into the vast darkness. To this day, that man remains unidentified, and his intentions are a mystery. I can only say that if I hadn't had my rifle, or if he had caught me off guard, I might not be here today. I don't go on many trips out of town, so this was one of the few times I've had to stay somewhere other than a friend or family member's house. The area I needed to stay in was small, and most of the hotels didn't look very nice. But to my surprise, there was a single home listed on Airbnb. It was my first time using the site, but the house looked like a decent place, much better than the hotels. I requested the dates, and in a few minutes, the place was booked. The following week, I started the drive. When I got to the town, which was about 14 hours from my city, it was well into the night. The town almost looked deserted compared to where I was used to living. All the houses' lights were off, and all the stores were closed. No people or cars were out. Of course, it was the middle of the night, so I didn't expect this small town to be lit up and active at this time, but it was still eerie, considering I hadn't seen it during the day. I only came in with this as my first impression. The street that took me to the Airbnb was dark as well, leading through a winding forested neighborhood until I eventually ended up at the house. It was one of the few that had its porch and outdoor lights on, but one window upstairs had a light coming through it as well. I figured the last customer had just made the mistake of leaving it on, so I thought nothing of it and started getting my stuff up to the front door. I got the key code from my email and opened the door, locking it behind me. I quickly put my stuff in the corner of the room, then went upstairs to turn off the light that was left on. It was one of the spare bedrooms, only having a bed and a small dresser in it. I flicked it off, then went to the main bedroom to set up my things. I was only staying for one night, but I had it booked for 2 because I needed to be there late into the following day. I was up for no more than an hour before finally getting in bed and turning in for the night. I rested my eyes and tried to sleep, but I was laying awake for a long time. I sat up quickly, hearing a thud run through the walls of the house. I stared at the door, trying to think of what could have caused the sound, but no ideas were coming to mind. I got up to check. I opened the door softly, peering into the upstairs hallway. It was dark and quiet now. No more thuds, only the sound of the house swaying in the wind. I stepped back and quietly shut the door, but a strange feeling came over me that had me wait as I thought more about the sound I heard. As I stood there, soft creaks started to echo along the floorboards from the other room. I listened with my ear against the door as the creaking moved into the hallway and then began making its way toward the door. I was so in shock that I almost didn't realize it had to be footsteps of someone approaching. My heart started racing as they came right up to the other side of the door. I put my hand tightly on the door handle to keep it from moving, and only a moment later, I felt it pull down. As soon as I resisted it, they eased off. There was a small moment before suddenly the handle was forced down, and they slammed into the door. It swung half open before I pressed my body back into it. I only saw half of their face in the doorway, but in their eyes was an anger that I didn't expect to ever see. After a struggle, I somehow managed to push the door back into the latch and lock it. The man on the other side tried to get it back open, but after yelling a few unpleasant words toward me, he ran downstairs and out of the house. I was still catching my breath, and my mind was racing, but I gathered myself and dialed 911. For such a small town, they came shortly after. The owner of the Airbnb continued with the case after I left the following day, but I wish I had kept up with it. That man seemed so desperate to get into my room and was in some state of rage, as if he wanted to hurt me as if I'd done something to him. Everything about it is disturbing, and I don't think I'll ever get it out of my head. But Airbnbs probably won't be something I take part in again for a long time. This was about 3 years ago when I was staying in a rental house while vacationing to see my brother. He lives 6 hours away from me, so I don't get to see him very often. He only has a 1-bedroom apartment, which makes me have to stay elsewhere when I visit him. The house I rented was really close to my brother's apartment, and it was the same price as nearby hotels, so it was an easy choice to go for the house. I had gotten into town early in the morning and met up with my brother for lunch. Then I got some groceries and was back at the rental around 5 p.m. The place didn't have a lot to offer other than a couch, TV, and bed. But for the price, I wasn't expecting too much. I stayed up until 9 p.m., then got in bed. It had been a long day, so I was looking forward to getting a good amount of shut-eye. I laid in bed awake longer than I wanted, falling asleep after an hour. When my eyes opened, the room was in full darkness, and I could sense that it was the middle of the night. Before I could even check the time, though, I heard something outside the room, footsteps slowly walking down the hallway, and then a door closing softly, followed by silence. It was like my whole body had frozen, laying in bed still and staring through the dark room. After a minute passed with no more sounds, I got up and looked into the hallway. At the far end, I could see the front door, which I knew was the door I'd heard them close, but I didn't know if they were still in the house or if they had left. I quietly walked through the other rooms, not seeing anyone. Actually, the only sign of them having been there was the front door being unlocked. I didn't see any footprints or notice anything missing. After checking the locks on all the doors, I called 911. They came fairly quickly, but didn't do much of anything. They said to make sure all the doors were locked and to contact the owner, but aside from their useless advice, they provided no intent to figure it out. I stayed up that night and waited until morning, unable to sleep. After calling the owner of the rental and discussing what had happened, I went to see my brother. While out, the owner let me know that he had changed the PIN code on the door, which did make me feel a lot better. I was out until late that day, getting dinner and drinks with my brother, and I was dropped off at the rental sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. I went to the couch and sat down, feeling sleepy but also nervous about the situation. Every time my eyes were about to close, my head would be filled with fear of the intruder coming back. Knowing I needed to sleep that night since I hadn't gotten any the night before, I decided to go through the house again and check the rooms in hopes of easing my mind. I walked around the living room and kitchen, then down the hallway to the bedroom. I opened the closet and checked the attached bathroom, and just before I walked out, I heard footsteps running through the hallway toward the bedroom I was in. I swung around the corner and caught a glimpse of a large man as he slammed the bedroom door shut. Then I heard his footsteps departing and going toward the living room. While I stood in place and just listened, he went all around the living room and kitchen, staying inside the house for probably 2 minutes before I heard the front door open and close behind him. The police came quickly after I called again, and this time the homeowner came by as well. The living room and kitchen looked like they had been ransacked. The furniture was scattered all over, and the cabinets were all open, with the things inside them tossed onto the floor. After a closer look, though, the owner didn't see anything that was missing. It looked more like whoever that man was looking for something very specific and nothing more. I left the rental and got a hotel after that, and within a few days, I was never updated again about anything. I assume he was never found, but the situation has left me with a lot of questions. Something that really gets to me is that I had checked the entire house that one night, so where was he hiding? How long had he been in the house with me? Was he watching me? And what would have happened if I had fallen asleep on the couch? At 22, I was living in a small one-bedroom house in the cheapest area of my city. On a rainy Friday night, I logged onto the game with friends, enjoying the perfect conditions for a late-night session, knowing I had no work or school the next day. After about 2 hours, a sudden thump from upstairs interrupted the fun. My first thought was a possible leak from the rain, so I went to investigate. Upstairs, I found only the bedroom and a half bath, neither showing any signs of leaks. I returned to my game, staying online until 2 a.m. when everyone else logged off. I turned off my computer, settled on the couch with snacks, and started watching YouTube. Just 10 minutes in, I heard another thump from above, muffled enough to sound like it was on the roof. Determined to find the source, I conducted a more thorough search of the bedroom and bathroom, but nothing revealed itself. I doubted it was thunder, as the sound vibrated through the walls like something striking the house. After 10 frustrating minutes, I decided to put on my shoes and step outside into the rain for a better look. Initially, I saw nothing unusual, but then I noticed a large tree branch brushing against the side of my house. It was a good 3 or 4 feet away from the siding and barely swaying in the rain, making it unlikely that it was causing the noise. As I examined it more closely, I spotted a small window partially obscured by the tree. It was higher than my bedroom window, indicating there might be an attic. I had no idea there was an attic in this house. The hatch was well hidden, and the roof wasn't steep enough to suggest one. This was the first hint I had ever seen of an attic. Curiosity piqued. I went inside and searched for the hatch. After a few minutes, I found it in my bedroom closet. It was small and blended in with the ceiling, except for tiny gaps where it opened. Standing on a box, I pulled it down and a rusty ladder unfolded. Immediately, a rotten smell hit me, followed by another thump from below. The attic was incredibly short, maybe 2 feet tall at most. I climbed up cautiously and peered into the dim space, which resembled a wide, dark tunnel. At the far end, near the window, I spotted a figure crouched on all fours, staring straight at me. I nearly fell off the ladder in shock and scrambled to escape. I heard shuffling behind me as I grabbed my phone and dashed out of the house, calling 911 from my driveway. When the police arrived, they detained the man, a homeless person who had climbed the tree to enter through the window. He had been hiding in my attic for at least a week without my knowledge. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost unbelievable. I moved out shortly after, and since then, I've always checked attics in every house I've lived in. But the image of that man, on his hands and knees, staring at me with a mix of fear and anger, has lingered with me. For the past few years, I've juggled 2 jobs, leaving home around 6 a.m. and returning at 10 p.m. This routine has become my norm, but a few months ago, something unsettling happened. After returning home one night, I followed my usual routine of showering and preparing for bed. While in the shower, I heard movement outside the bathroom door. I quickly stepped out to check, but saw nothing. I dismissed it as the house creaking. Later, as I lay in bed, I continued to hear strange noises throughout the night, mostly creaks, as if the house were swaying in the wind. Yet there was no wind and no reason for these sounds. At one point, I got up to investigate, but found nothing. The next morning, I was exhausted and relied on coffee to keep me alert throughout the workday. When I returned home, I was drained and looking forward to sleep. I went straight upstairs and turned on the shower, but before I could get in, I heard something outside the bathroom door again. This time, it sounded like something had moved across my room. Uneasy, I knew I had to check, but when I finally gathered the courage to look, I found nothing. I walked through the house, checking each room, but I was convinced that something strange was happening inside the walls or beneath the floorboards. I showered and climbed into bed, falling asleep just before midnight. When I awoke, a sense of unease washed over me. The room was pitch dark, and the house was completely silent. I couldn't pinpoint what had disturbed my sleep, but I felt it was connected to the strange sounds I had been hearing. As I peered at the door, I noticed a faint shadow moving under the crack. My heart raced as I jolted upright and watched the shadow retreat from the door, followed by the sound of footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Horrified and paralyzed by fear, I felt a surge of adrenaline propel me out of bed. I swung open the door to find the dark outline of a man standing at the end of the hallway. His eyes were the only discernible feature, piercing through the darkness with a mix of anger and restlessness. I quickly slammed the door shut and locked it. I heard him descend the stairs, but I hesitated for another 30 seconds before finally hearing him leave the house. I called the police immediately, but their search yielded little. They found some evidence that the man had been inside my home for several days, but that was it. I often think back to the moments when I heard him passing by the bathroom door. Perhaps he had been hiding in my bed, retreating to the closet whenever I entered the shower, using that time to leave the room. I also wonder why he lingered downstairs after I had seen him, knowing I had likely called the police. It's all just speculation now, but the thought of a stranger hiding in my home while I slept is truly horrifying. As far as I know, he hasn't returned, and there have been no updates on his identity. Last year, I moved to a new house far from the city since my job was now remote. I had no reason to stay in an expensive, crowded area. For the first couple of months, I enjoyed the solitude and peace of my new surroundings. One afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. It was the first time anyone had come to visit since I moved in, which caught me off guard. When I opened the door, I saw a tall, middle-aged man. "How can I help you?" I asked, trying to be friendly, assuming he was a neighbor. However, he leaned to the side, peering into my house as if looking for someone else. Feeling uneasy, I stepped back and blocked the entrance with my body. The man turned and walked away, heading down the driveway and into the street, where he got into a parked car and drove off. That encounter left me unsettled. Later that night, I decided to stay home for dinner, just to be safe. I considered calling the police to report the incident, but hesitated, worried I'd sound silly for being alarmed by a stranger at my door. Around 9 p.m., I turned on the TV and tried to relax. While I was on the couch, I heard voices outside. I muted the TV and listened carefully. It sounded like at least 2 people were talking somewhere in my backyard. I rushed to the back window and opened the blinds. I spotted 2 figures moving through my yard. One held a long object, but the other was harder to see. They walked between the trees until they reached the side of my house. I went to a side window to follow their movements, but I lost sight of them, and the talking stopped. Just then, loud knocking at my front door startled me, sending chills down my spine. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in dark clothing and a hat that obscured his eyes stood there. He had to be one of the men I'd just seen, but where was the other? "What do you want?" I shouted, hoping to scare him off. He remained at the doorstep, glancing at the side of my house before returning his gaze to the door. The silence stretched on, escalating my fear. I hurried to the living room to grab my phone and call the police, but I was interrupted by a series of loud crashes. Looking across the hall, I saw a man smashing a shovel against the back door. He caught my eye for a moment before fleeing. Terrified, I hesitated, torn between calling the police and finding a place to hide. I knew I should do both, but just then, the sound of something hitting the side window jolted me. I dialed 911 while the man continued his assault on the window. Just as the operator answered, everything fell silent. The police arrived soon after. To my surprise, the man who had been at the door earlier was still there, refusing to leave. Under questioning, he denied everything, despite the visible damage to my doors and windows. It was incredibly frustrating, and even weeks later, he still wouldn't explain why he visited or who the other man was. The unanswered questions still haunt me. Why was he trying to break in, and what role did the man at my door play? I eventually moved away, hoping it wasn't me they were after or still pursuing. Later, I decided to sell an office chair I no longer needed on Craigslist. It was in good condition, barely used. After a few days, I received a message from a man interested in buying it. We had a brief phone call, and he seemed like a nice guy. He agreed to my asking price, so everything looked good. We arranged to meet in a local Walmart parking lot, which felt safer in a public setting. On Friday afternoon, I called the man to let him know I was on my way. I drove to Walmart and arrived right on time. He mentioned he drove a gray Honda Civic, which struck me as very generic and not particularly helpful. He knew which car I drove, so I expected him to see me, but time passed with no sign of him. I sent a text and, a few minutes later, called again, but he wasn't answering. After waiting in the parking lot for nearly an hour, I decided to head home. Most of the drive back, I felt annoyed about wasting my time. However, about halfway home, I noticed a car had been following me for a while. I became nervous, but when I turned onto my street, the car veered off. Once inside, I dropped my phone and belongings on the counter and went back out to retrieve the chair from my car. As I walked down my driveway, a car pulled up along the road and parked directly in front of my house. I couldn't be sure, but it looked very similar to the car that had been tailing me. It was a dark red sedan, at least 15 years old, with rust covering it. I quickly grabbed the chair and returned inside, closing the garage and locking all the doors. I peeked out the windows and saw the car idling in front of my house. Checking my phone again, I saw the man still hadn't replied, which only heightened my anxiety. After a minute, I heard a car door open and close. I looked out the window and saw a figure in dark clothing standing by the car, facing my house as if inspecting it. I quickly closed the blinds and called 911, explaining that a suspicious man was outside and that I thought he had followed me home. They dispatched an officer, and I thanked them before hanging up. I cautiously lifted the blinds to check outside again. The car was still there, but the man had vanished. My heart raced as I moved from window to window. It wasn't until I reached the back door that I spotted him again. He was standing inside my fenced backyard, staring up at my house. I felt a chill. I feared he might attempt to break in at any moment. After a moment, the man began walking toward the side of my house. I rushed back to the front window to see if he was going back to his car, but he didn't reappear. I checked every window again, growing increasingly anxious. Just then, the police arrived. The car remained parked outside my house, but the man was nowhere to be found. To make matters worse, the car was completely empty, lacking any papers or fingerprints inside or outside. The police discovered it had been bought from a junkyard years ago, which was the earliest record they could find. They were just as baffled as I was, especially since the man had vanished without attempting to break in. One thing we could conclude with some certainty was that he was likely the same man who had used an untraceable email account to follow me from the Walmart parking lot to my home. It's been a couple of months since all of this happened, but I still worry. Why else would he have taken the time to inspect my house from all angles if he wasn't planning to return soon to finish whatever he intended to do? When I was 21, I made the questionable decision to move out of my parents' house before I was financially ready. For months, I had meticulously planned my escape, searching for affordable apartments and potential roommates, prioritizing independence above all else. After extensive searching, I came across a Facebook post about a room for rent in my area. It was a 2-bedroom house, and the owner was offering the second bedroom. I quickly messaged him and received a prompt reply. After a few questions, he sent over a document that appeared to be a lengthy list of rules for moving in, basically common sense. Once I agreed to the terms, he invited me to see the room that same day. Upon arrival, I was pleasantly surprised by how clean and beautifully decorated the house was. It looked like a model home. The owner, Terry, was a bit odd. He was in his late 20s, but his demeanor and appearance didn't quite match the pristine house. Wearing a dirty t-shirt and speaking strangely, he nonetheless excitedly welcomed me, and I was too eager to care. A week later, I loaded a rental van with my belongings and drove to the house. To my shock, the interior was almost barren with no decorations or furniture, just an old couch in the living room. It was nothing like the first visit. Terry was there, acting as if everything was normal, chatting about how thrilled he was to have a roommate. When I inquired about the missing furniture, he brushed off my question and focused on moving my things in. Feeling uneasy, I still went ahead and settled in. Weeks passed, and I rarely saw Terry. He was always working late. After about a month, I noticed he had stopped coming home most nights. I would only hear him return once a week around 2 or 3 a.m., lingering downstairs for a while before disappearing again. Part of me didn't mind as I enjoyed the solitude, but I was also curious about his whereabouts. He had seemed so eager for me to move in, yet now he was rarely around. Then one night, I was jolted awake at 2 a.m. by Terry banging on my bedroom door and shouting my name. I rushed to the door, and there he stood, drenched in sweat and looking furious. "Do not leave your room," he hissed, wrenching the door from my grip and slamming it shut. Shocked, I listened as he walked downstairs. I quietly opened the door and, after a moment, heard him dragging something heavy across the floor and into the garage. I rushed downstairs to investigate. There were muddy smears leading from the kitchen to the garage door. When I tried to open it, I found it locked from the inside. Realizing I needed to get out, I ran to my car and drove away while calling the police. When they arrived, Terry was already gone, and the mess had been cleaned up. After several days of investigation, I learned that Terry had been renting the house from someone else, meaning I had never legally moved in. The documents he provided were fake, and I suspected that Terry wasn't even his real name. As far as I know, he never returned. I can't shake the feeling that he was hiding something terrible, and his insistence that I stay in my room that night makes me wonder what plans he had for me. I'm just grateful I escaped before discovering the truth. Three years ago, I relocated a few states down the East Coast for work. I didn't have the chance to visit the area before moving, but since I was renting, the risk felt minimal. In mid-September, the movers came, loaded everything up, and delivered it to the house. The landlord kindly let them in to unload before I arrived the following week. On a Monday evening, I finally saw the house in person for the first time. It was chaotic, with boxes everywhere and furniture strewn about, but overall the house was decent. The layout was unique, a single-story design with the kitchen and living room on one side, and a long hallway with all the bedrooms and bathrooms on the other. Since it was late, I went to the master bedroom and began assembling the bed. Afterward, I turned off the lights and went to sleep. Without a clock set up, I lost track of time, but I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by an unusual noise. Initially, I thought it might be the house settling, but I decided to investigate, wondering if it was something I needed to report to the landlord. As I approached the door, the sound ceased. I opened it to a pitch-black hallway and turned on the light, but found nothing. I cautiously walked down the hall and peeked into the living room. It appeared unchanged, but I turned on the lights to inspect. Scattered across the floor were numerous footprints amidst the boxes, likely from the movers. With no other signs of disturbance, I returned to my bedroom. It took a while to fall asleep again, my mind racing about how the noise stopped as soon as I opened the door. I tried to rationalize the sounds as house noises, but nothing made sense. Just as I drifted off, I was startled awake by a loud thump, followed by footsteps racing down the hallway. My eyes shot open. The bedroom door was wide open, and clear footprints led right up to my bed. I quickly got up to investigate, but whoever had been there was already gone, leaving only scuffed prints trailing away. I called the police and locked myself in the bathroom until they arrived. They found no signs of a break-in, aside from the footprints. I convinced myself that someone might have entered before I moved in, but something still felt off. After unpacking and checking every box, nothing was missing, which left me puzzled about what they had been doing in the house. The most pressing questions were why they approached my bed and what that thump was before they fled. The landlord seemed eager to let me break the lease without repercussions, as long as I kept the break-in quiet. At the time, I thought he just wanted to avoid scaring off potential tenants, but now I have my doubts. Story 11. Creepy Truck. This happened a couple of years back when I was 26. My single mother had just passed away, and being the only child, her house was left for me to either sell or move into. I was living in a really nasty apartment because I couldn't afford much back then. After much deliberation, I decided to move into the house. It was already paid off, so I was saving a considerable amount of money by moving in. My goal was to hopefully save up for a few years, get back on my feet, then sell it and buy the house that I wanted. Once my lease was up at the apartment, I moved across town to the house. It was part of a community of farmland owners, but in recent years, most of that land had stopped being used for farming and was left as just empty fields. That's what happened with my mom's land as well. It was pretty much just an old barn-style home in the middle of a huge field, with only a small overgrown path leading to it. In the first week living there, I spent most of my time cleaning and getting all of my stuff where I wanted it. During one of these nights while I was cleaning, I heard a car coming toward the house. I looked out the window and saw an old pickup truck driving down the overgrown path. It was very strange, being that the only reason for them driving here would be if they were coming to the house. But just as they approached the end of the path, they slowed to a stop. I could make out a male figure in the driver's seat, but couldn't make out any specifics. They stayed there for a moment, with their headlights shining over the field, before they did a three-point turn and drove away. I thought they probably just typed in the wrong address or something, but it was kind of creepy to see someone coming all the way out here so late at night. A few days went by, and by then I'd finished getting the house cleaned up and organized. It was a Sunday night, and I was staying up late watching TV and eating a home-cooked meal when a familiar sound came up in the distance, a car driving toward the house. I looked out the window again and saw that same pickup truck coming down the path, this time with all its headlights off. Knowing it couldn't possibly be an accident this time, I was more worried. I quickly looked at my phone and saw it was nearly 1 a.m., so why would anyone be coming here? The truck came all the way to the front of the house and parked. Then a man got out and started walking up to the porch. I waited anxiously, but after a minute, there was no doorbell or knocking. I cautiously went up to the front door and looked out the peephole. A man was standing right on the porch, looking directly at the door. I was terrified as he looked like he was contemplating something. Then he turned around and went back to his truck, getting in and hurrying away. I was really creeped out, so I called the police and reported it, but there was nothing else to be done. I went to bed that night with a really bad feeling about everything. Apparently I was right, because I woke up to what I thought was the sound of a knock at the door. It was just a single knock. I got up right away and looked out the window, but the truck that I thought I'd see wasn't anywhere outside the house. I quietly left my bedroom to try and go downstairs and see who it was, but just as I reached the top of the steps, I could see that the front door was slightly open. I froze, and moments later, I heard footsteps walking through the hallway below me. I quickly hid in the spare bedroom that was next to me and dialed 911 as the footsteps grew louder and started coming up the stairs. They went straight into the main bedroom, and I could hear them moving stuff around like they were looking for something. I was too scared to speak to the officer on the phone, worried the intruder would hear me, so I just sat there silently. They spent a few minutes going through the bedroom before leaving and going back downstairs, and finally exiting the house. I started talking to the officer as I ran up to the back window to see if I could identify them before they got away. It was dark, but I could see that it was the same man who was on my porch earlier. He was walking in the backyard toward the field of tall grass, eventually disappearing into it. The police came by and tried to find any evidence to help with the case, but my description of the man was about all there was that was helpful. I don't know what that man wanted, but he seemed to be looking for something specific. It makes me think maybe he knew of something my mother had, and after hearing of her passing, he wanted to steal it. But once I realized he had to have known I was home and probably in the bedroom, it terrified me to think about how he still went in and looked around. What was he planning to do to me if I was still in there? I ended up selling the house a month later because I was too scared of him coming back. Even now, I still check every few months to see if there have been any reports of recent break-ins at that address, but it's been quiet ever since that night. Did you enjoy this content? Let us know. Thanks for watching till the end. See you in the next video.